In Britain, the battle lines were drawn. In America, the fight was already underway. Things were at a low point in the United States. President Carter spoke of malaise and loss of confidence in the country. Revolution in Iran had led to a second oil shock, and Americans held hostage in Tehran. Despite the beginning of deregulation, inflation was still at record heights. Carter's attempts to follow Keynes' formula and spend his way out of trouble were going nowhere.
Jimmy Carter was maybe the high point of Keynesian behavior, and it simply was not working.
Toward the end of the Carter administration, with inflation out of control, Paul Volcker was made chairman of the Federal Reserve. He understood the problems.
I'm grateful to Paul Volcker for being willing now to accept the oath of office and then the responsibilities as chairman of the Federal Reserve System of our country. Paul.
Paul Volcker was steeped in the ideas of Austrian school economics.
It's obvious to all of you from what's been said today that we're face to face with really unique economic difficulties.
Volcker believed that inflation was one of the worst of all economic evils.
It came to be considered part of Keynesian doctrine that a little bit of inflation is a good thing. And of course what happens then, you get a little bit of inflation, then you need a little more. If it peps up the economy, people get used to it, it loses its effectiveness like an antibiotic. You need a new one, you need a new. And I certainly thought that inflation was a dragon that was eating at our innards, so our need was to slay that dragon.
Volcker used a blunt weapon. He tightened the money supply. The economy went into a nosedive. Facing a presidential election, Carter was reluctant to back such harsh measures. Carter's rival was the Republican Ronald Reagan. Reagan shared the same economic philosophy as Margaret Thatcher. For over 20 years, he had been campaigning against the Keynesian orthodoxy and for Hayek and Friedman's ideas of free markets and freedom.
Reagan knew Hayek personally, and he knew Milton Friedman personally. And Reagan was, in a sense, their popularizer. So he was the person who could take these people who were very profound but not very easy to communicate. I mean, I don't think you'd ever get Hayek on the Today Show. But you could get Reagan explaining the core of Hayek with better examples in a more understandable language.
Vote for me if you believe in yourself. If you believe in your right to control your own destiny and plan your own life. Yes, and have to say with the spending of your own money. The president is going to have more government on the backs of the people and of business and of industry, the working people, in order to try to solve the problems that were created by too much government on our backs. We can get government off our backs, out of our pockets. This kind of indifference to economic disaster must be ended, and it'll be ended by having a different kind of leadership.
The American people voted for change, and Reagan became president.
The situation was this. The only way you could get the inflation down was by having monetary contraction. There was no way you could do that without having a temporary recession.
Obviously, who wants a recession? But I can remember President Reagan using those famous words, if not now, when? If not us, who?
Reagan offered Volcker his moral support in the fight against inflation. As Volcker tightened the money supply, the economy slowed and contracted. Unemployment hit 10%. Nobody had realized quite how tough it would be. All across the heartland of America, ordinary people were hurting.
Well, the interest rates, that eats up all your profit. It becomes very difficult to keep your business running right. 1980s, the interest rates were up to 20% or better. It was very interesting times. I remember, cash flows got very tight. As things got tighter and tougher, creditors forced sales. Come up with the cash or we're going to have to liquidate you. It's a hole that almost seems impossible that you can get out of.
If you had told me in August of 1979 with interest rates, the prime rate would get to 21.5%, I probably would have crawled into a hole. Would have crawled into a hole and cried, I suppose, but we lived through it.
It had taken 3 years. 3 years of growing public anger. 3 years of real hardship for millions of Americans. But by 1982, the dragon of inflation had been slain.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Reagan and Volcker had set the United States on a new economic course.
From our very first day, we've been working to undo the economic wreckage they left behind.
They called his policy Reaganomics. It had 4 key elements.
The first was the concept of sound money. The second was deregulation. The third was modest tax rates. And the fourth was limited government spending. Sounds pretty conventional now, but when Reagan was elected, he was vilified by his opponents as being some radical extremist.
They just can't accept that their discredited policies of tax and tax, spend and spend, are at the root of our current problems.
Reagan's tax cuts, the biggest in history, led to huge deficits.
Our program has only been in effect for some.
But the economy started to grow steadily again.
There's no doubt in my mind that those actions of Reagan, lowering tax rates, plus his emphasis on deregulating, unleashed the basic constructive forces of the free market. And from 1983 on, it's been almost entirely up.